words about Michael by way of introduction. We're all eager to hear Michael's thoughts on the state of cable and broadband and where things might be headed. And I'm sure Dick has some good questions to get the discussion going. Chairman Powell, we're delighted to have you with us today. So as I turn the program over to Dick Wiley, please join me in welcoming NCTA President and CEO Michael Powell.
Thank you, Rick. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're really pleased to have back for a return visit Michael Powell. In addition to his current position, you all know that he was at the Commission for over 8 years. He's a graduate of William & Mary and Georgetown Law Center, clerk of the D.C. Circuit, did a little private practice, and went to the Justice Department as Chief of Staff of the Antitrust Division, and following the family heritage, he was also a U.S. Army officer, Armored Cavalry, right? So it's great to have you, Michael. And by the way, congratulations on the contract extension from your association.
Thank you. It's good to get paid.
Because we're not paying. We're going to talk about a number of different areas, and then hopefully some time for questions from the audience. Let's start with something you began. You caused all this. Network neutrality. Because you basically came up with the idea, albeit principles, that were sort of under Title I, approved by the Supreme Court, Brand X of 2005, but then we went back, as you know, as we all know, to Title II, and now we're back to Title I. If a Democrat should become elected president in 2020, do you think this ping-pong is going to continue?
First of all, I wish I'd never given that damn speech. If I had any conception back then that it'd still be going on today, I would have burned it and shredded it and never given it. But seriously, we have been living with it a long time. Your question about ping-ponging, there's a principle of regulatory law that I think is incredibly important. It's often forgotten. It's the principle of finality. And part of law's value, if it has value, is that it reaches a state of finality and certainty, at least for some governing period of time, in order to have a real meaningful, constructive effect on the markets it's intended to address. And I think, whether we backed into it or it was intentional, we've created a circumstance where, as long as net neutrality is an FCC-only thing, without the intervention of a congressional act, it is permanently stuck in ping-pong. For a couple of reasons, it seems to me. The first is, I think when the previous commission moved to Title II, they did something that was pretty dramatic, which is they shattered the historical bipartisan commitment generally around telecommunications policy. By bolting Title II to net neutrality, which enjoyed fairly widespread consensus among both sets of classic regulatory ideology, you bolted on something that conservative policy thinkers would never accept. So you created a partisan divide around net neutrality that was sort of pretty intractable. Secondly, by virtue of the way the case was interpreted and ruled on by the D.C. Circuit, which I like to always remind people is really was essentially a case about administrative deference. And the deference granted and the opinion written was extraordinary, in my judgment and the judgment of many. But as a consequence of that deference, meaning, sure, FCC chairman can change their mind, change the interpretation of a statute based on their policy preference, you essentially permanently enshrine the right for any new chairman of any differing ideological or policy perspective to flip the rule over. And essentially, as long as this process is within the channel of the FCC, it will flip, it potentially can flip like this forever. And this is why the importance of having a Congress, who ultimately is the authority of the Commission's jurisdiction, enter the fray and render some judgment in order to, one, establish clear jurisdictional boundaries, and two, to introduce the kind of certainty and finality the rule requires. And the last thing I'd say about it is, one of the things I'm positive of is when a debate goes on ad nauseum for too many years, it is increasingly irrelevant. There are so many more issues that are rising up of greater significance to consumers, to producers. The market moves on. And I'm very worried that by the time net neutrality is over, if it's ever over, it isn't going to really matter. It will have been an enormous waste of resources, time, and energy. But the major way that the network and the internet have moved on, and the issues that concern consumers are going to be radically different than when this issue first started being talked about in the early 2000s.
So do you think we're not going to see it in an election year, but how about in 2019, thereafter, is legislation, bipartisan legislation, a reality?
Legislation's hard, it's unpredictable, but I remain somewhat optimistic that the elements are there for bipartisan legislation if we have the courage to just stop trying to profit from controversy and start trying to solve it. Because if you profit from controversy, you have no motive or incentive to bring the war to an end. It's interesting watching in the CRA process to hear, Senator Markey and others explicitly champion the CRA process and the controversy as a political strategy for advancing prospects in the midterm elections. Well, is that really about public policy, public telecom policy, or is it sort of about how does one take advantage of this controversy to advance their self-interest? If we don't get that out of the way, it's not going to happen in 18 or 19 or 20.
Well, suppose we don't get legislation. What do you say to critics who say, without Title II, the FCC really can't enforce rules against throttling, blocking. FTC, the regulations are not going to be effective. They don't have rulemaking. And in all due respect, ISP assurances aren't going to get the trick done.
Well, if the Congress does nothing and the FCC is left to its jurisdiction, I would only point out that Judge Tatel was quite clear that there were alternative paths potentially available to address both those rules. In fact, in the oral argument defending the Wheeler rules, he even himself snickered from the bench about you didn't follow the path I laid out for you. So there is theoretically a path in the minds of at least that panel of the D.C. Circuit of an alternative path that doesn't involve Title II. The second thing I would say is I wish people would stop demeaning the Federal Trade Commission. It is as equally an important agency as the Federal Communication Commission. It has a mandate that I would argue is more nimble, with greater penalty power, and greater facilitation of the kinds of rapidly changing markets than the Federal Communication Commission has. And why can one argue in the scheme of the government why it's a trivial institution and the FCC is somehow a sine qua non of effective enforcement? I'm not so sure that's true. Certainly not true all the time. This is an agency that has developed an enormous amount of expertise in things related to the internet, from privacy. They have an anti-competitive understanding of those laws and principles that I think is superior to the Commission's. And I think these issues have those kinds of qualities associated with them. Last thing I'd say to you said about ISP assurances. I always giggle a little bit about this. Don't believe they're assurances. Companies don't do things because they're good of heart. I think what's most terribly understood in the net neutrality debate is the ISPs have not done this stuff because it isn't in their greedy, profit-maximizing self-interest to do so. For 20 years, they could have done all of this stuff. They could have charged for prioritization, they could have blocked content. No rule prevented them from doing it, and they didn't do it. What have they done instead? They've increased capacity 2,500% in 15 years. They've deployed faster than any technology in world history to 94% of the United States. They have created a product that has dropped in price per megabit faster than Moore's Law operates. Where's the evidence that their profit-seeking incentives are to create artificial scarcity and charge for it on the web? And the critics at most come up with like 7 or 8 examples. In the history of 20 years and 1 trillion bits a year, this is the best you've got. Why? Because they make a lot of money selling an infrastructure that's open, that gives the internet, their consumers, the kind of internet that their consumers want. And by the way, they're doing quite well from Wall Street standpoint and their own standpoint from their P&Ls by selling open infrastructure. And if you look at AT&T's plans or Comcast plans or Charter's, right now on the drawing board is moving to a gigabit. Cable has gigabit speeds now in 40% of its markets. That doesn't look like somebody trying to manufacture scarcity and sell it. Finally, I'd say, and who are they going to sell it to? You think Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Netflix are going to pay you? See retransmission consent disputes, right? The idea that Charter or Comcast or AT&T has more leverage than Google, Facebook, and Amazon in a dispute over pay, Google's just going to look at you and say, oh no, I think you should pay me. I'll just cut you off from all of Google's product. See how well that works for you. So I think it's a fantasy. I think no one's ever seriously evaluated the incentives and the means of ISPs to do these things. They just assert it almost religiously and reflexively as truth. That's a mistake.
Are you concerned about the efforts of some states to put in their own network neutrality regulations, in defiance of the FCC, or even more, to have some executive orders that would affect how ISPs operating in their states would conduct their own actions?
Yeah, it's not politics. This is really bad policy. When I was a younger commissioner, chairman, and the internet was full of techno ecstasy and euphoria, and we all gave speeches in this room. You know, it's the Copernican revolution and the internet and E this and I this. We were all excited about it. I remember a woman named Frances Cairncross, I think wrote an article in The Economist magazine. She talked about the death of distance. The genius of the internet, it was the death of distance. It closed time and space in ways that other internet structures struggled with. Remember, the telephone network was chopped up into all kinds of artificial, geographically limiting boundaries. LATAs, servers and LATAs, and long distance and local. And we organized public policy around concepts of space and geography. But Congress even began recognizing in '96 that was making no sense even in the modern telephone network. And subsequently, with the rollout of wireless, we destroyed long distance. We actually have no real distance-sensitive, geography-sensitive approaches to network deployment today of any significance. So, just like interstate commerce in trucking, I don't think bits can have laws change as they cross state boundaries. And having 35 different approaches to net neutrality is a disaster for coherent public policy. Because even if the citizens of Washington believe firmly in this principle, they're writing it one way. The citizens of Oregon are going to write it a different way. The governor of New York is doing procurement policy. None of these things are coherently integrated, but yet the network providers provide a network that kills distance and now has to be sensitive to those variations. Every commission I know of that ever opined on the question is the internet is an interstate service. It is an interstate service reserved to the federal jurisdiction for the same reasons as an interstate commerce clause. I'm also convinced if the order goes into effect and is upheld, every one of these things is illegal. They are expressly preempted by the commission. I personally think the commission is on sound ground in reaching that conclusion. And I think most of these state actions are political acts that aren't that well thought out. But ultimately, this is another reason why congressional legislation is important, to get back control of the internet into a global infrastructure.
Let's go to another area. Set-top boxes. Set-top boxes.
Did you have to go to that?
Yes, I had to. Because you remember Chairman Wheeler tried mightily, but ultimately unsuccessfully, to move away from boxes and move towards some kind of an app regimen. Now, the cable industry, as I recall, opposed his efforts greatly, saying, hey, we're moving to an app ourselves. So where do you stand on that right now?
So I'm going to challenge the way you asked the question because I think the predicate's wrong. I think the Commission's proposed order, the boxes were a decoy. It wasn't really about boxes. It was about disaggregating cable service and allowing entrants to have access to highly valuable content without having to negotiate and pay for that content, under the ruse of creating box competition. In fact, if you look at all the proponents of the order, they were box manufacturers. Just because it's the TiVo box, or the Roku box, or the Apple TV box, or the proposed Google box, those were boxes too. What those companies were really after, don't blame them for trying, is to break into the cable model and get access to that content without having to pay for it, without having to negotiate for it. The reason that content companies, many of their great advocates sitting right here, were so outraged about it is they smelled what was happening. This was IP theft, dressed up to look like it's about boxes. The way the app issue got into the conversation was my belief, and I think the belief of my colleagues, was this rulemaking is actually enshrining boxes. It was proposing technical approaches to separate the content from the infrastructure that would have almost guaranteed from now on you have to have a box. Because even they admitted they didn't know exactly how one did this technologically, but the proposals were for hardware to be engineered in ways that would separate content, put it in the clear, and give it to Roku. So we kept saying, you're not only thieving our stuff, you're enshrining boxes when the market's bringing a lot of pressure to move to software-based distribution, including apps. And I think the market is still experimenting and struggling with that move. Every one of my cable operator companies has an app. Many of them have full-service apps that can run on Rokus and other devices. But the key is that's what the market is experimenting with, not the industrial choices of the FCC. And I think I was grateful the order didn't pass, and I should say we should commend the Commission because the majority of the commissioners were never persuaded it was a wise outcome, and they're the ones who killed it.
So what's the future of the autonomous box? I mean, it's a $20 billion business still for you guys. So is it going away?
This myth, the box is not a major revenue, is not a major profit center for the cable industry. That's one of the great, you forget that the box is why customers hate it. I mean, the box means coming to the store to get it, driving it off when you're done, truck rolls when it breaks. Boxes introduce an enormous amount of logistics and costs to the cable system. A lot of our operators wouldn't like anything more than to be able to go to some sort of software solution that can deliver that without them having to have truck rolls and inventory and boxes. So, who knows what the future of the box is, but its days in some ways are inevitably numbered, just like all hardware versus software solutions seem inevitably numbered because of the efficiencies and the efficacy of software. So, we've always said in our industry, we're trying to move from being a hardware-centric business to a more software-centric business, and I think that path is likely to continue.
Let's go to another kind of sore subject, cord cutting.
Although I will laugh, some of the biggest over-the-top streamers now want to be in our boxes. So apparently they haven't walked away from the box either.
Given all the emphasis on streaming, over the top, and all the rest of it, we hear about a new effort every day. What's the real future for the traditional cable industry as you see it?
In some ways, I think if you are in the electronics bits space, there is no such thing as traditional. You adapt or you die. And, the cable industry, and I would confess, and I'll take culpability, we don't market as well as we should. But this industry is often poorly understood of how well they do adapt. We've had many reported threats to our future. Satellite was supposed to destroy the cable industry. This is
Destroy broadcasting too.
yeah, it's getting there.
People might be coming back.
This Ebony and Ivory show will continue. Look, in the 80s when satellite came along, the cable industry took the biggest risk, one of the biggest industrial risks in all of telecom. They went and borrowed in the capital markets shocking amounts of money, and they ripped up their networks, stem to stern, tore out the amplifiers, and laid fiber across their whole footprint. I remember as a commissioner, and even after, the cable industry is a financial disaster because they're so leveraged, they have so much debt, they'll never get a return on this investment. This is what everybody talked about in the cable industry in the 90s and into the late 90s. And they made a decision to do that. That put them in a position to, one, make the HD transition and to provide high quality video streams in order to compete effectively with satellite. But more importantly, it put them in early, probably earlier than the telcos, other than their advantage with DSL. But they put them in the lead on broadband early because they had a fiber optic infrastructure that they built principally for video, but to adapt. And they saw that opportunity and they invented the cable modem. With all due respect to Al Gore, I think the cable industry invented broadband. Because the cable modem really made possible the always-on, much faster experience we call internet today. And today, we've already crossed over. The majority of cable companies have more broadband customers than they have video customers. That's an adaptation. They still sell one of the most important inputs to the information economy, so they're going to be just fine. The video business is under challenge and disruption, and we'll have to adapt to that, or it will die. And I would say the we is not just distributors like us, it's the media industry too, who's struggling really hard to how to adapt and recapture kind of revenue expectations they've had under the old model, under a new one. And God bless them, and God bless cable and telcos, everyone's out there trying. It's a world of experimenting, and no one's sure what will work. Will there be erosion? Sure, we once had 90%, in 1996, I think we had 94 or 5% video, multi-channel video market share. We were monopoly. Today, our share of that is 50% or less. All that share shifted to satellite and telco. But we're not dead. Quite vibrant. And I think we're going to have to do the same thing. I think it'll be here for many years to come.
One of the uncertainties, of course, is how do millennials feel about the bundle? What do you see as the future? Moving away from the large bundles to skinny bundles, maybe getting to Kevin Martin's a la carte?
Yeah, I think it's a caution for us who are used to these categories to use them to try to predict the future. The bundle is just a construct of how you provide an experience and how do you provide an interface of access. So Netflix is a bundle too, right? I mean, everybody forgets that they probably have more stuff on their platform than we have on our platform. Oh, you have a big bundle, you have 120 channels. How many shows or content libraries do you think Netflix has? The elegance of their product is the interface they show you and the way they curate what you watch. But trust me, I know because I've done it. I can go watch all 3 seasons of The White Shadow with Ken Howard all day long on Netflix. Even though I might be the only one. But trust me, they're a cable company too. They're a bundled aggregator. Everything, they have way more on their bloated plant than we have on ours. But they have an interface and a price structure and a distribution model that's very elegant. So what I think about millennials, I don't think millennials have lost interest in storytelling, content, interactivity, but they have changing patterns of behavior about the way they interact, access. Whether that's, I think Skinny Bundle is an experiment in that change. I don't think it's the landing platform or the nirvana, but I like seeing companies working on it because it says that their mindset is finally broken free from what they have and are out there playing around with new alternatives, which I think they need to be doing.
You mentioned high definition television. Of course, you were very instrumental in the cable industry's adoption of our current standard, video standard, so-called ATSC 1.0. But now we're proceeding on a new standard. And you've been sort of an advocate for strict simulcasting requirements on broadcasting on the carriage of ATSC 1.0 and 3.0. What's the concern there? That the broadcasters might denigrate their service to the public?
Everyone in this room knows this is Dick Wiley's question. I don't want to talk about ATSC 3 at all, but I don't have much to say on it. All I would say is this. I went through the HD transition, and it's complex. It requires multiple complex variables to come together simultaneously. It stalled for more than a decade. It required a lot of, I'm a free market guy, but it required a lot of direct government management and intervention, whether it be what I did, what you call the power plan, or even Congress in a bipartisan way, voting to subsidize and pay the cost, which is the only time I've ever seen it, pay the cost of equipment to transition the American public to a new service. The thing about ATSC 3 is the Commission's rolling it out as a complete voluntary market thing. It's not being accompanied by the same kind of structured management of that transition, which is a choice, it's fine. But I think it means that you have to be attentive to the ways in which it can accrue negatively to the benefit of consumers, including being put in a position where they're not getting the quality that they've come to expect, or costs are being shifted either to other industries or to the consuming public. And so, and I also would just add one other layer, Dick, broadcasting is either special or it's not. If it's special, that is, it has a heightened place in the public interest model, that in exchange for the free inputs of the American public, it incurs an obligation to provide its content free to communities across the country, then yes, I think there's a heightened interest in ensuring that the profit motive, you can make money without serving consumers. I think that's the incentive.
But don't you think the marketplace would take care of it?
No, I don't.
You don't think the broadcasters would be concerned about paying a price if they denigrated high definition down to standard definition?
Sure. Look, I'm not saying, first of all, let me be clear. I'm all for the technology standard. I'm excited for broadcasters and their opportunity. But it's their opportunity. And you have to be careful to make sure that that burden of that transformation isn't shifted onto others. And I think there are issues in which the market wouldn't take care of it. That you could have a profit incentive to do things with 3.0 that could leave some consumers out, and or if you were able to monetize more profitably something else, I think a rational economic actor would do that. Look, 13%, something like that, of American consumers take content directly over the air. So ATSC 3.0 at scale is really cable carriage. And that's how it's really going to happen. And so you have to be concerned about how does that, we can pretend it's over the air, that's the way it's over, but it's not. It's not going to go to scale unless it's